Here's the real brief background. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, Beth and Levi and I were all part of a discussion group that used to meet at Jacob's Well that was made up primarily of NMC students. And we discussed religion and ethics and politics and philosophy and entertainment for probably 2 years, I think we met. And some of them moved on to different things in life and the group kind of disbanded. But Beth and I have been talking for quite a while that we really missed that. And found out Levi was moving back into town. I thought, okay, let's broaden it out. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a group in Traverse City that could meet and bring people together from all different backgrounds and perspectives and discuss not just current event topics, but get down to the deeper questions of life. So that brings us to etc. So you're here for the kickoff meeting. Thanks everybody for coming. And we are streaming actually as we speak. I think there's how many people watching, Scott?
6, right?
We're up to 6 people watching. And for the people watching, like 6 stadiums is what you're saying. They could tweet just at @etc.tc, or you can go to Facebook at @etc.tc. And if you want to make comments or questions, in fact, anybody in here could as well throughout the evening. You've got note cards on your seat that are question cards. They have some of that information on there, and I'll get to that in just a second. Etc. is a street-level philosophy group motivated by Socrates' maxim, the unexamined life is not worth living. We are united by our fascination with the philosophies and worldviews that impact our everyday life or our street-level life. Our goal is to create a forum of honest inquiry, informed discourse, and reasonable presentations of even the most volatile of issues. Our ultimate goal is to bring moral and or philosophical clarity to our culture, our world, and our very existence. It's a daunting goal, but if you're up for it, we are too. You may have seen on our website some upcoming topics this year. We've got a general idea from month to month what we're going to talk about. We're meeting the last Thursday of each month at 7 o'clock. Next week, we're going to discuss the Occupy movement with a broader question of how do you find economic justice. We've already got several speakers lined up for that particular one. As we get closer to election time, we'll delve into politics. We're hoping to do a special one during the film festival week, just on the intersection of entertainment and culture. Does it reflect or does it shape who we are? Getting toward Thanksgiving and Christmas, talk about the role of religion in national holidays in America. So we're trying to hit a variety of topics and find presenters who are experts in this field, whether it's through study or just a real life experience, who have something to offer to inform us about this particular subject. Our goal throughout the evening is, of course, to do a welcome. You're probably going to have to put up with this little introduction every month. But every week kind of explain what we're about, introduce the speakers. As the speakers come up, and tonight we have 2. We have Scott Blair and Levi Meeuwenberg. They will take some time to present their opinion on the topic at hand. You'll just see Beth and Scott Smith and I asking some questions, some follow-up questions to them, clarification, trying to probe a little deeper into what they were saying. At the end of the evening, there will be opportunity for you to ask questions to them as well. The preferred way to do that right now is on the squares that you have on your seats that say question. You could, once again, tweet it. You could text it to Scott, and he'll read them there. Or fill something out, and when the time comes, I'll come around, grab all the questions. That way, in case there's overlap, I can combine 5 questions into one. I can also say it by the microphone so we can pick it up clearly for all 6 stadiums that are watching us. And that'll take us to the end of the evening. At 8:30 then, you are welcome to join us over at the Blue Tractor, where it will change into more of a discussion format. This first time is intended to gather information and just learn about the subject. If you like a more lively give and take, please join us afterwards. As of now, the Shed 2, which if you go to Blue Tractor and come to this side, is reserved for us tonight. So if you want to, join us for a discussion there afterwards. We've asked our speakers as they come in every week, and perhaps some of you might be interested in speaking later, so this is worth you hearing as well. We've asked our speakers to speak boldly, kindly, and clearly about the topic, to represent their view, or in some cases they may be discussing an issue from multiple perspectives, but to present it at its best. We'll ask questions to help understand the strengths and the weaknesses of what's been presented. And we've asked our speakers to be ready for questions as well. Our advice to the audience is to listen, to learn, to take this opportunity to seek to understand where other people are coming from, to gather information and learn more about your neighbor and more about ways people view the world. Once again, join us afterwards if you want a more lively discussion to take what you've been hearing here and engage with others about it. I just want to give a brief introduction. I don't want to take too much time away from our presenters tonight. I'm interested in what both of them have to say. Maybe you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave. He said that in general, and I'm not going to do justice to the depth of his story, that many people are like cave dwellers who think they're viewing real life, but all they're seeing is like flickering shadows on a wall. And they're content to live in ignorance. They're comfortable there. They don't know what they're missing. There are the brave souls who venture out of the cave and they get into the sunlight of truth. And once they're there, they cannot be unchanged by that. And so they go back into the cave and they're trying to let the people who are just seeing the shadows know there's something more out there that's real and that's good and that's true. That's the goal of what we're looking for with etc. And that's the primary topic of what we're talking about tonight. I would say there's at least 5 ways that throughout history people have claimed to be able to find truth about life. One is through philosophy. You're seeking coherence. You're using logic and reasoning. One is through science, where you're using the scientific method, empirical methods to study the world around us. One is through religion, through sacred scriptures or religious leaders or metaphysical experiences. It could be society asking authority figures, parents, teachers, perhaps even politicians, to weigh in on issues and inform us, otherwise we wouldn't learn. Or psychology, looking within to plumb the depths of yourself to help yourself understand. There have been 3 key ways, welcome, come on in. There have been 3 key ways that people think about things. One is through deductive logic, where if you've got true premises and you order them correctly, conclusions that you reach have to follow. When you have that kind of reasoning, it's both valid reasoning and sound reasoning. You see this in the realm of math, logic, and is often used in philosophy to discuss the issues. There's inductive logic, which is more of the scientific method. You're looking at individual things around you and reaching a conclusion, making predictions about the general state of the world. Or there's something called abductive logic, where you're looking at an event, a situation, and you're trying to find the best reason that that could have happened. You're inferring to the best explanation. Pretty much everything that we think about in life, we approach with one of these 3 categories, not precisely. These can overlap, and there's a lot more to be said about them. But in general, that's how people have thought about the deep issues of life over the years. Here's our key questions, and we're on to our speakers. How do we know the conclusions we reach about important topics aren't just valid, but they're also true? How do we know which foundational premises are the ones we ought to build our thinking from to lead us to true conclusions? What do we do when there's observational evidence that doesn't match up with conclusions we've reached already? What do we do when something challenges the norm? Which explanations that we find have the most explanatory power as we look at existence? And then finally, how do we decide which things in life deserve our time, our attention, and our trust? There's a lot of competing voices, and discerning which ones to listen to is a challenge. That brings us to tonight. You've got on your chairs a sheet of paper with a little bit of introduction about each speaker. But I'll go ahead and read it for the sake of, are we still at 6? Or we have 7 stadiums yet? Still at 6? 9 for the 9 stadiums that are watching. Scott Blair got his Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Michigan. He's currently the manager of the Traverse City Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. He's on the Grand Traverse Humanist Board of Directors. He's a participant in the Area Council on Religious Diversity and Pub Theology, and I might add there's some more people here tonight from Pub Theology. And he attended this year's Reason Rally and the American Atheist Convention. And as tonight's topic was the Reason Rally correct? When I found out Scott was there, I said, Scott, you're the guy to come talk to us about it. You were there, you experienced it. So I've asked Scott if he'll talk not just about the Reason Rally, but just in a more general sense, the topic for the evening. How do we find knowledge? Scott Blair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And if I get hoarse, does this work? And I have a cold. I'm sorry, and It's not a big room. I can cover it with my voice unless it starts to fail me. So, yes, how does a person pursue truth? That was the question as Anthony put it to me. And my talk is in two pieces here. I have the philosophical piece first. I'll talk about that question, and I'll give you a first-hand account from having attended the Reason Rally about a month ago. So how does a person pursue truth? Well, it starts with questions, and I appreciate this forum emphasizing questions over assertions. And further, I appreciate how the topic is framed tonight. You're not asking us to talk immediately or directly about what I believe, for example, but rather how does one go about determining what warrants belief? I care about truth. I think that we should all have a responsibility. We should feel a responsibility to truth. You know, it's so often said that everyone has a right to an opinion, and that, of course, is true. But with rights comes responsibilities. We're taught that as well, right? So I think we have a responsibility to do the work to make sure that our opinions have some reasonable chance of actually being correct and true. I believe that we have a responsibility to truth because beliefs matter. Our beliefs affect how we raise our children. Collectively, they affect the character of our society. They affect the way that we relate to other societies. Decisions about what our country will kill and die for. And more subtly, and maybe more importantly, our beliefs can affect whether or not we feel we have control over our own future. And maybe more importantly, whether we think it's important to control our future. So we have a responsibility to truth because beliefs matter. So what kind of truth or what kind of belief am I talking about here? Almost everything. Everything involving physical reality. How nature behaves, cosmology, physics, biology, consciousness. Can it continue after death? Where did humanity come from? What might our future be? And I think most religious and ethical claims actually have one foot solidly in the realm of tangible reality, which makes it something that is subject to the way of pursuing truth that I'm going to be talking about here tonight. One shouldn't select beliefs as if from a menu, just according to which ideas resonate with a person or speak to a person. We don't get to choose what's real, therefore we really don't get to choose what we believe. How often do you hear that? I choose to believe that. If in fact there's an objective reality, if it isn't a figment of my mind, if I were dead or had never existed, I think all of you would be here experiencing this reality without me, although you might have a different speaker tonight. So if there is an objective reality independent of my mind and yours, then we don't get to choose what to believe. We have to go out and discover what in fact is true. And the tool for doing that is inquiry. More specifically, I use the term dispassionate inquiry. Dispassionate in the sense that you have to divest yourself from an emotional connection to the result that you might produce. Dispassionate inquiry is the effective way to pursue truth. If you want to understand reality, you go out and observe and investigate reality while actively separating the process from influence of emotion, folk beliefs, culture, ancient texts, and intuition. Dispassionate inquiry done in a methodic, documented way is the process we call science. And the power of this method is inarguable. Civilization has been on Earth for thousands of years, and humankind, or the species, has been on Earth for tens of thousands of years. And out of all that time, it's only been in the last little sliver of it, the last 300 years or so, that science, that dispassionate inquiry has really taken root or been exploited to understand nature. And in that little period where people have applied this method, it's only been a small, very small fraction of the population who actually utilizes it. Yet the power of what this method is able to do has changed the face of the earth. You know, our technology that allows us to use energy and the population go up. I mean, for better or worse, I'm not addressing that here today, but it's evidence of the power of the method, of the scientific method and of dispassionate inquiry. And it's happened against the dogma of the day. There's a quote that I am going to attempt to relay to you. It comes out of a big book that I have called The Discoverers, authored by Daniel Borstein. And I looked through it. I couldn't find it to properly attribute it, but the essence of it is this. Nothing inhibits the acquisition of knowledge more than the belief that one has it already. And that ruled the world for millennia up until the advent of dispassionate inquiry in science. And now, a rational person doesn't achieve truth like the summit on a mountain and stick a flag in it and claim it forever. A rational person forms mental models that match as well as they can tell. They test those models against other models and against facts, and they modify them and even potentially replace them when the information warrants it. In contrast to the inquiry approach, I think, is faith. And I think, and people who operate from my philosophical perspective, believe that faith is an entirely invalid way to try to understand reality. Faith is starting with the answer. Faith is a determination to believe in a construct that is not a product of inquiry because it appeals to the heart. And it's often a fantastical story, yet it is protected from analysis by the believer's emotional conviction that faith is a virtue. It's an intellectual trap that a remarkable number of people are in, maybe even most people in the world. I think that faith is antithetical to the pursuit of truth. And I'll give you a second to digest that. My wife said that that's a bit provocative and that if I just keep going, people are not going to hear what I say next because you're going to be arguing with me in your head. This forum stresses drilling into principles. The material that Anthony has sent out makes that clear. And dispassionate inquiry, as a way to pursue truth, has one fundamental premise on which it depends. So I'll offer that here for your contemplation. That premise is the constancy of nature. If nature behaves reliably, its truths are accessible to careful inquiry. If nature behaves reliably, if nature behaves the way nature always will behave, then its truths are accessible through the process of dispassionate inquiry. And nature is constant. I think there's a virtually, literally infinite number of examples of that. You know, every single piece of sand in the Sahara is silica that has arranged itself in accordance with the organization of nature. Every time a chemist leaves his bench for the day and goes home and comes back, he can count on those chemicals reacting in the same way the next day as they did today. Every time you measure the acceleration of gravity on Earth, you know, it's 9.8 meters per second. The numbers are in books because you can always rely on nature to behave the same way. Everything that's ever been engineered, every airplane and skyscraper or television set, depends upon the fact that nature will behave the same way tomorrow as it does today. Otherwise, airplanes could fall out of the sky. Nature follows rules. All that exists is a manifestation of the rules or the math of nature. Kind of like a certain note is an inevitable result of the math of the length and tension of a guitar string. All that exists is allowed and compelled by nature. It's kind of like what exists is the solution to an ultimate equation. In my mind, well, all that is real is natural, and in my mind, the word supernatural and imaginary mean the same thing. There are no miracles. There's no ESP, telekinesis, no virgin birth, six-day creation, Noah's flood, people turning into pillars of salt. This is all storybook myth. The most awe-worthy, beautiful feature of reality is that it is, in fact, natural, not supernatural. Now, to be clear, I and other rational thinkers do not reject emotion in life. Rather, we only reject emotion in the process of inquiry into what's true. That's where it's not the right tool for the job. Emotion is the proper reason for everything else in life. Also, I'd like to sort of preempt and clarify that an adherent to dispassionate inquiry, I know we can be a little geeky and in our investigation sometimes, I guess, but don't interpret that as a lack of awe and lacking a sense of wonder. We don't unweave the rainbow, as Keats once accused Isaac Newton for, trying to understand the behavior of light through prisms. Rather, the inquiry allows us to see additional layers, layer upon layer, of additional coherence and beauty in nature. So, care about truth, take responsibility for it. Beliefs matter, don't form them casually. Do the work to form sound mental models of reality and be continually testing them. When you get to the edge of what you can know, don't make stuff up. Pause there. Enjoy the mystery. So if you let me draw a breath here, I will kind of switch to a different texture, I guess, in the presentation and tell you about our road trip to Washington, D.C. I was a month ago, I think now, a group of us from the Humanist Club had a road trip, went down to Washington, D.C., where we attended both the Reason Rally and the American Atheist Convention, which was the 2 days following the rally. The goal of the rally, according to the organizers, was to draw atheists out of the closet, to demonstrate a political presence for secular principles, and to dispel stereotypes regarding atheism. Now, the rally was great, it was fun, it was well attended, and we might have got 2 out of 3, but I'm not sure that we actually dispelled any stereotypes. The rally was, it was cool, it had a cool vibe. It was in some ways Woodstock-like because there was just this sea of people, and it was raining, and there was umbrellas, and we're all kind of buzzed on the one-of-a-kindness of the event, being with people who are sort of kindred, and watching speakers up there talking passionately into their microphones as their shirt gets drenched with the rain that blows under the awning. It was diverse. There was a kind of a rally like this about 10 years ago with about 1/10 of the attendance, a group of atheists on the mall. And at that time, the movement was almost entirely made up of middle-aged white males. And this rally was diverse. There were men and women of every age and race, orientation, military, civilian. There were people with piercings, and there were button-down collegiate types. It looked like the country, and it felt cool. Another fun thing about it was the shirts and signs. A lot of them humorous, some of them provocative and a little irreverent, as you of course would expect. But when we first popped out of the escalator from the subway out onto the mall, first thing we saw was a T-shirt. It was black, and it had a big insect, a praying mantis on it. Only instead of classic, he had his arms folded, and it was labeled atheist. So we took lots of pictures of these kinds of things. Presenting, oh, thank you, that'll help. Presenting were scientists, poets, musicians, authors, comedians, and they had a whole range of dispositions and attitudes. There were bridge builders. For example, Todd Stiefel. This is the guy that made the rally possible. He donated the $250,000 it took to make this thing happen. He spoke of the secular movement and organizations, forming alliances with other people and other organizations to pursue our common goals. And he pointed out, excuse me, He pointed out his Christian wife in the audience. Stand up, dear, he says. I don't know if she was ready for that. And then on the other side, there were, atheist activists in their fighting posture, giving us the list of things they're angry about. And there were comedians with a steadier stream of F words than I'd expect to hear at that time of day. And first of all, I appreciated everybody, and I probably pretty much agreed with everybody, although I do wince a bit at the more aggressive positions and at the coarseness of some of the folks or the comedians, because I'm kind of more one of the bridge builder types, and I have a sensitivity to, the face of the movement, so I do cringe at a little bit of that, but I also kind of understand it. One person I'll mention specifically with regard to that is Richard Dawkins, because even though he just had his 15 minutes up there along with all other 38 presenters throughout the day, he's sort of regarded as a headliner, and he gets a lot of the press. And I actually regard him, contrary to maybe a reputation that he has, as being civil. When you see him on YouTube or on programs or talk shows, he is actually perfectly polite and respectful, even while he's challenging people's ideas. So when he came out in the Reason Rally and he was a little bit more aggressive, he said people should ridicule ridiculous ideas. In public, he adds. And he said, I don't despise religious people, I despise what they stand for. And I'm not sure that religious people really would make a great distinction between themselves and what they stand for. However, he went back up a few notches for me, because the next day at the convention, when he came out to speak there, the first thing he said, he was reflective about that and wondered if he had gone too far and recognized that there's a line to walk there. And then also, I understand his exasperation. It would be as if a medical doctor, or my friend Mark here, a cardiologist, were to speak in front of doctors perhaps on a topic that would be absurd to him, like perhaps homeopathy. If he were to do that, he couldn't help but express contempt for some anti-logical remedy that competes with a science-based approach to medicine. So, I feel that a bit also as an atheist living in a world where people believe some pretty fantastical things. All right, so the rally was it was exciting, and it was quite like I expected. Now, the convention was a little bit beyond my expectation. I identify as a humanist. Humanism, the philosophy, has the non-belief component. We don't believe in supernaturalism. And then there's also some affirmative components to it. We believe in leading ethical, fulfilling lives and pursuing the greater good of humanity. So when I went to an American atheist convention, I expected it to be more narrow, dealing just with the non-belief portion. And there'd be academics and lawyers talking about church-state issues and such, and there was that. But what I didn't expect was a sense of community. All right, I got some cool stuff to go through, and I'm a little behind. All right. What I didn't expect was the sense of community, the mutual support and the love in the room. There were stories of bravery. Jessica Alquist is the teenage girl who happened into a fight against her school. There was religious banners in her school, and she stood up at a public meeting in support of somebody else's complaint about that, and ended up being tapped by the ACLU to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit about it. Christians in her community harassed her. She had death threats. A representative in her state called her an evil little thing on a radio show. And the American Atheists gave her a check for $62,000 raised online from the atheist community. Justin Griffith is a brave soldier at Fort Bragg, an atheist. Did you know that atheists can't meet at bases? There'll be 12 or 14 chaplaincies at military bases, but the humanist group couldn't meet there. So Justin is bravely and respectfully and through channels struggling with the military to gain their right as atheists, the right that they would risk their lives fighting for. Taslima Nasrin from Bengal described how she lost her religion, Islam, at a very early age, and put it into books, and now there's fatwas against her. She hasn't been back to her country in 17 years. She says her home is in the hearts of the people who support her. Jerry DeWitt is a former pastor, a Pentecostal, and he described his difficulty in reconciling his faith and his perception and the evolution of his doctrine until finally a tipping point happened where a parishioner called him and asked him, or needed him, to pray with her as a family member had been in a car accident. And Jerry was unable to pretend to this woman that anything except the best medical technology at that hospital was going to help that person. And there were other former pastors at the meeting, and Jerry and they lost their jobs. Some of them lost their wives, their livelihoods. They might be reviled by the community that they had served and still love. And the atheists provided a place, a welcoming place, a community to support them.
Well, Scott, thanks for talking. When Scott got here tonight, he said, "Man, I've been fighting this cold. I don't know." So thanks for soldiering through that. And I apologize for where your chair is because you're being blinded at this point. So feel free to move a little bit if you'd like. We're going to ask Scott a couple questions. And if you've been thinking of questions as well, please be sure you're writing them down and saving them for the end, because you'll have a chance to ask Scott some questions as well.
Now, Anthony, or after?
Yeah, we'll just ask you a couple questions now, and maybe it'll answer some other people are thinking. And if it hasn't, it'll clarify the ones that they want to ask as well. So stand somewhere where you're comfortable, because that sun is blinding. I'm watching the other Scott over there. You noted, I believe, that we don't choose what we believe, we discover what's true, or something along those lines. How can we be sure that as we're interpreting the data that we discover, that we are doing justice to the data and not interpreting the data in a way that's creating something instead of seeing what's actually there?
Yes. To some extent, smaller in some areas and bigger in others, you're never sure. You can only do the best you can. That's why I spoke of building mental models and always trying to keep them as current and as consistent with the observations as you can. And you've got to always be willing to modify those. Now, some models get pretty well established. I think of the process of science sort of like a jigsaw puzzle spread out on your dining room table. People get a little bit confused by press, and because people and the press don't necessarily understand the process of science, but out at the edges of the puzzle, you're putting pieces in that look like they fit, and they might not, and you take them out, and they might be there for a little while, and then you reject it and take it out. So, and that's what gets reported on. A new study says cold fusion. Next piece of news is that there is no cold fusion. Well, that's at the ragged edge of that puzzle where all the action is happening, and that's how it's supposed to look. In the middle of the puzzle that you've long moved past, all the pieces fit tightly, and a picture forms. So you never know for sure. It could be the data could be misinterpreted and it could be eclipsed. But the very process of science helps sort that out as you go. You can't build new science on bad science. Does that help?
Yeah. So one question for you. You talked a lot about rules and trying to logically deduce what's happened in the universe. And you said you don't believe in the supernatural because you like to follow the empiricism of logic and science. For those people who might, in the audience, come from a faith background, do you feel it's impossible for science and faith to be compatible? So at a certain point, what if people in the audience believe that there's a higher power that have ordered these rules and ordered this logic? And what if supernatural activity is just rules that we don't understand yet?
Right. I mean, what science fiction writer said that any technology sufficiently advanced would look like magic? Fair enough. As far as could there be a rule writer? Potentially. I think science and religion are actually completely incompatible anywhere where they actually overlap. That's not to say that from my perspective, I can rule out, an ultimate cause. Or, Einstein is one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto. But he was resistant to being called an atheist. But his God, he said, I believe in Spinoza's God, a God that is sort of like the underlying order of the universe. He was so appreciative of the beauty and the coherence there that he sort of personified it and sort of called it God. But he did not believe in life after death. He didn't believe in an interventionist God. He didn't believe it was a personality or a consciousness out there that's messing around observing human beings. So to that degree, I can't tell you that there isn't an essence out there that makes up the underlying order of the universe. But I'll add that I don't think there's a reason to believe that there is. I think it's sort of anthropocentric to think, oh, there must be some human-like consciousness out there that assembled these rules. I think it just is, and I think it's kind of magical that way. It's kind of like just the math that underlies the ability for things to exist.
Scott, at one point you read a quote from the book you were reading. Was it Explorers?
It's called Discoverers. It's this history of inquiry, really. It ignores all the wars and conquering and everything, and it goes from when man first started keeping time with watches and hourglasses or whatever, all the way up to the present. And it's by Daniel Borstein. I'd recommend it to anybody. And the quote was something to the effect that the biggest thing that inhibits the acquisition of knowledge is the belief that we have it already.
Yeah, that was the quote I was thinking of. It sounded like a little bit later than you talked about part of the process of gaining knowledge and using scientific reasoning is you're forming mental models. And I was listening to that along with the idea of being careful not to plant a flag in a particular thing. It sounds like with the puzzle analogy that you used a little bit ago, that if I'm understanding this correctly, the perimeter is not where you would plant a flag, but it sounds like you'd plant a flag in the center. How do you make a distinction between the things that you plant your flag in and the things that you don't?
I don't think there's a hard and fast distinction. Some things, it's usually once in a great while something gets overturned completely, but but it's usually that it gets eclipsed by a more comprehensive model. Let's just keep things simple almost. When everyone imagined that all the heavens revolved around the sun, that was intuitively cool. It seemed to be what you see out there, but right, that the heavens revolve around the earth. Thank you. I really confuse people when I misspeak.
It's the bright sun. It's throwing everything off.
It's going around us. So obviously then the heliocentric model fully explained everything that the Earth-centric model did, but also captured the motions of the planet. So it's usually a matter of being eclipsed by a more complete and comprehensive model. And I would say you never plant a flag completely immovably. I'd say there's flags that I'd bet everything I own will not be moved. But, a rational person recognizes the limits to the ability to know. But it's in degrees, and it's a matter of how complete and how tested that model becomes.
Final question, and then we'll move on to our second presentation for the night. And then once again, if any of you are thinking of questions, be sure you're making a note of them. Do you think there are ever times where people are justified reaching pretty strong conclusions in spite of not having enough evidence to make it conclusive? I'm afraid that feels vague. And I would use the word faith, but faith often carries with it a specifically religious connotation.
Yes.
In a broader sense, do you think it's ever justified for people to make commitments to a particular thing as true before enough evidence is in to give them a tremendous amount of confidence? Or is that never a good idea?
Well, we're talking about life here. So it depends entirely on circumstances. Sometimes you have to make a choice with the best information you have, right? I think there's probably a whole other talk in the idea of instinct versus analysis. And they both have their roles. Obviously, analysis is the best. But some people mistake, well, what is instinct? When you feel something is true by instinct, it literally is a leftover, evolution has sort of led to brains that we have that need to be able to take shortcuts in thinking for expediency. And the penalties for getting it wrong could be very severe, but the penalty for believing something that turns out not to be true are not that severe. And therefore, there's a bias towards having a real emotional commitment to a belief that might not be true. So we're a little bit wired to leap to conclusions. And instinct is good in circumstances where expediency is more important than accuracy. But instincts work best when they're well informed from practice and experience also. But let's not mistake that feeling for a direct path to truth.
All right. Thanks, Scott. We'll have
Absolutely.
a couple minutes at the end for some more questions. Our second presenter is Levi Meeuwenberg. And as you can see on your sheet, while attending the University of Michigan, Levi helped to lead the University of Michigan's Parkour Club and create AmericanParkour.com, now the world's biggest online parkour and free-running community. He is now a member of the elite parkour and stunt team Tempest Freerunning, though he began his career by performing in Madonna's Confessions World Tour and Jump music video. Levi is mostly known for his multiple appearances on the Japanese game show Ninja Warrior, where he was the last man standing out of 100 competitors. I wish that was on my resume, that I was the last man standing. Man. Levi is also a street philosopher, having studied at NMC and U of M and traveling the world while posting video and print blogs about the deepest questions in life. And I just know from Levi over the years, as he has traveled, he engages people everywhere he goes and seeks truth. So, Levi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Anthony. Hello, everybody. Yeah, just in case you're wondering what happened here. Well, the story goes, me and Anthony had a little philosophical disagreement about the categorical imperative, and, well, it just got ugly. Actually, I just landed on my face at the gym the other night. That'll happen. But hope you don't mind a little music. Anyways, so I guess I'm up here to tell you that everyone's got it wrong and I've got it all figured out. but actually, I'm more of an evangelical agnostic. I don't know, and neither do you. Here's a diagram I made years ago, mostly based on Bertrand Russell's writings, and I actually had a little bit of a philosophical crush on Bertrand Russell. Kind of obsessed with his ideas, but he really believed that clear and careful mapping of our tree of knowledge, by clear and careful mapping of our tree of knowledge, we can make a solid logical path from a priori principles to universal truths. I used to agree and spent many hours constructing these elaborate diagrams and reading through the Western philosophical canon. This is just a little diagram I created just to kind of, it's more of an idealized version of how to approach like a philosophical issue. So you have your issue and all these different positions. You're trying to weigh the different ideas. And I kind of think of like evidence as like these stepping stones to get from the issue to the different positions. And that'll gauge like the amount of certainty you can have in that position. And there's different types of leaps of faith, like if you're making an assumption, it's like this, I don't know, you can see it right there. Anyways, so that's not really how I have everything in my head. It's a little more blurry than that. Anyways. Because of the rigorousness of the scientific method, it provides us with facts which are both highly specific and have a very high probability of being true. So I figured, if it's not testable and proven through repeated experiments, then I have no business believing it. And I thought that I could arrive at the full truth if I read enough books or do enough figuring. However, what I've come to realize is that this approach can be self-limiting, especially if you imagine trying to apply the rigors of scientific method to dating and relationships. It's just a mess of uncertainty. You just never commit, I think. But that doesn't make our loving relationships any less meaningful and significant in our lives. And then I realized that there are very significant truths which are beyond the scope of present scientific research, which are yet accessible to us through direct experience. So then I began to see science as the clear point of focus in the center of our perception. If you think about your vision, we have only this small spot of focus where we can kind of like look in different spots, but our whole peripheral vision is more blurry. So I see science as like that central focus. But it's our peripheral vision that puts it all into perspective, that provides the big picture, even though it's a blurry one. And then there's the whole universe that goes on beyond our perception as well. And this is where we encounter the deep mystery in which we're wrapped. A mystery that, though unknown, though perhaps unspeakable by human language, maybe even incomprehensible by human intellect, has yet a profound impact on the world in which we live and perceive. So, the first few times we experience a new phenomena in our awareness, the experience is fresh and novel. It sticks in our memory. We remember all the details clearly. But gradually, we pick out the salient features of this phenomena and place them into a conceptual box, which we call words. And from this point on, when we perceive this phenomena, we only perceive this box we've created in our minds. And so from childhood, we begin a process of papering over our perception of the world with labels, with signposts. And this is when we experience not the world around us, but our collection of boxes within, and spend our time obsessively rearranging them and cross-examining them, thinking we're experiencing and exploring the world, when really we're just naked apes playing a game of blocks. In general, this tendency is natural and helpful in getting along in this complex world. However, too easily do we forget about the wondrous, strange, and sometimes scary world of our childhood out there. That we don't know everything, that we haven't seen it all, and that even that which we see, we may not take the time to truly see in its unique ephemeral existence, but just see our placeholder. The real danger is when we start doing this to other people too, putting people in boxes. And I think, speaking also personally, we also put ourselves in a box. And I'm talking about the image of ourselves that we create in our heads by picking out certain themes or threads in our life events and stringing them together into a narrative that we repeat to ourselves and to others. It's that ongoing voice in your head that's narrating your life. How long do you think you could stop it for? Do you think you could just stop that ongoing kind of narrator in your head? Well, we'll give it a try at the end. But this self-construct is, well, in Buddhism, it's called the ego. But it's useful in order to share our stories. But again, we're in danger of forgetting that vast, mysterious universe within us. We cannot fathom what we are. Let's not forget that we are a community of trillions of individual cells sending off a storm of signals every moment that somehow condense into the singular stream of consciousness that we are experiencing now. We're actually wired to some degree to fall into these routine patterns of thinking. We create a web of neuron cascades that become our mind's comfort blanket. As you know, our synapses grow stronger every time they're fired and weaken as they go unused. So our brain naturally falls into familiar patterns of thought. But learning is a process of creating new pathways to explore, and every moment possesses opportunities to learn if we're open to it. Language and intellect can serve us very well. It can transport us and give us great knowledge. But we can't forget that it also can limit us if we don't take time to appreciate things that go beyond words. That, in fact, The world of words is a small artificial bubble of our collective creation, floating in a vast sea of mystery. And sometimes we feel lost at sea, and so we try hard to cling to some philosophical concrete, to find some unquestionable ground upon which to stand. But this fails to recognize the quintessential characteristic of reality: impermanence. Change is the only constant. And just as this planet just floats in space, requiring no support, no structure on which to stand, so too must we learn to let go and swim in this river of life. We don't need to cling to belief systems and dogmas, grasping for land. For all we ever turn up with is paper boats created from the signposts and labels of yesterday's news. Life is in the process of awakening to the reality of its own existence. Ever since the first unicellular bacteria, our great-great-grandmother, emerged in the bubbling mud of the young earth and developed the ability to respond to simple stimuli in its environment, life has evolved ever greater and more complex ways of modeling and responding to reality. Now look at us human beings. We think we've got it all figured out. At least that's the modern culture's rap. No matter what strange or mysterious phenomena may arise in one's experience, culture, including religion, has armed us with a pre-programmed response to it, to trivialize it, to tuck those loose ends back within the limited, quivering ball of perspective that's been passed down to us. But the truth is, we hardly know anything about the true nature of reality. Yeah, science has offered us a clear picture of it within our dimensions, time frame, and scale. But we're still waking up in this world, and we yearn so much to know what's really going on here. We need an open cosmogony. An open cosmogony has an appreciation for the mysterious, an awareness of the incompleteness of our understanding. And to appreciate this is to acknowledge that we're on a journey. That spirituality is just as much about growing and evolving this understanding as it is about remembering the discoveries, dreams, stories, and knowledge of our ancestors. Your journey is not the same as my journey, because while spiritual truth is universal, it's experienced personally. Books and words can only hint at it, but we're all headed towards the same destination in our own ways. The truth is inside. The truth is here and now before your eyes.
Levi, one of your first diagrams showed the stepping stone idea of working your way from an idea to the conclusion. The model on the screen appeared visually to suggest that these stepping stones will never lead you completely to a conclusion. Were you suggesting that no matter what conclusion you're reaching, you always have to make some type of step or leap of faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think for some things it's very, very small. I think it correlates very closely to what he was saying about, very well established scientific truths. Like there's almost no need for a leap of faith. But ultimately, if you do look into like the foundations of logic and everything, there's always assumptions built in. So, and you have to just take those face value, just take it for granted for what they are.
Okay, so I think, sort of what you're advocating for, I think there are probably a lot of people who really crave validity or sequential events. So if I understand this, then I can make the step to understanding this, and make the step to understanding this. You talked about a little bit about boxes and how you perceive something and then you put it in a box and you kind of experience it through that box going forward. Do you think that there are places in life where those boxes are valuable? I mean, Scott talked earlier about the shortcut to kind of understanding things or the expediency. So maybe talk a little bit about the way you think like those boxes are destructive and the way that they're helpful.
Well, they're very useful for communicating with each other, like we're doing right now. Having like this agreed upon reality, which is based on our language, and just other concepts and ways that we organize our thought and in culture. It's very useful. I'm not saying we should not be using those at all. I'm just saying just a little bit of balance. Every once in a while, maybe trying to shut that off and just taking it in. Just shutting the mind off, taking in the senses. is also very a different approach.
I was reminded of. Go ahead.
No, not at all.
I was reminded of a song from Alanis Morissette a number of years ago, where one of the lines in her song is, "Why are you so terrified of silence? Here, can you handle this?" And the song stops for a couple seconds and it's completely quiet. And then when it picks back up, she asked, "Did you think about all these things, or did you long for your next distraction?" And it just struck me now. I was longing for my next distraction. Question from Scott Smith. You mentioned the idea of spiritual truth and said that it's inside. What do you mean by that? Are you talking about a soulishness? Are you talking about an idea? What do you mean when you talk about spiritual truth residing inside?
Well, by that, I'm not really saying that the whole truth is inside of us, but I do think that just through inner exploration, we can have deeper insights both about what we know and about what we think we know, and maybe kind of see it from a different perspective. But the word spiritual, like, I sometimes hesitate to use it because I'm not trying to suggest like something supernatural or something magical. It's more just when I say spiritual, it's something very significant. It just denotes a category of profound significance to me, to life, to everything.
All right, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll take questions from the audience. When you talked about the blocks, I'm going to go back to this block idea again. One of my questions was, how do you get out of it? Because as you were discussing it, you have the idea that we think in life in terms of blocks, and one of our goals is to kind of shatter those blocks, if I understood correctly, and think differently. How do we arrive at confidence that other blocks we're unaware of aren't helping us form new blocks? I was thinking of like the Matrix or Inception. How far back does that go, or what breaks that cycle of blockishness?
Well, that's actually pretty much the whole process of meditation and Zen Buddhism, which they really focus on ego and breaking the main box which you identify with, which is yourself, your identity, your ego, by kind of stepping back from it and just watching the thinker and kind of starting to take notice of the patterns of thinking that you fall into, and maybe trying to transcend above that or see something higher than that. And then once you get there, then there's always like the next step back, and it's just always kind of this never-ending process, actually.
Fair enough. All right. Do we have anybody with questions? All right. Let's come around and gather, and feel free to grab another cup of coffee if you need to. We've got about 15 minutes or so. Sometimes coffee doesn't take Anybody else over here? You know what? You guys mind just getting stand up there just so you're by the microphone. Scott, do you have anything texted or tweeted or anything coming in over there?
That's some of the questions I gave you on those sheets.
Oh, okay. Here I was thinking you were very creatively coming up with all these tremendous questions.
Well, the good ones were mine.
All right. Some of these questions are geared toward both of you. Some of you particularly asked for one particular person to answer. In general, feel free if you want to weigh in, even if it's not your question, if it catches your imagination. Let's go with that one as well. Okay. First question. Scott, are you of the opinion that there is no faith involved in the application of the scientific method? Or it's almost like the stepping stones question. Is there a place in the scientific method or at some point you have to take even a small step, or do you feel like the scientific method completely rules out the necessity of arriving at conclusions that are not completely warranted?
I think that I still don't quite like the word faith, but if we dial it back to intuition, there's a role for it in maybe accelerating the process to have some insight into what might be the thing to test next, or what might yield some results that would demonstrate something more firmly. If you understand what I mean, I think it can be part of the process, but it's not the end of the process. Maybe I'll add to that.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm going to project what I don't know if this was what was in the questioner's mind, but I will resist an analogy to the kind of faith that a religious person would have, because as I described when I talked, I think it's that kind of faith is the opposite, is starting from the wrong end of the process, starting with an answer and then trying to assemble ideas that support it, rather than saying, I'm not even going to invest myself in the results of this process. I want to find out what it really is. So I do want to make a distinction between the kind of faith that you sometimes hear a person say that, science, that's a religion. They have their faith in, test tubes or whatever, and I have mine in God. And I don't believe that's correct.
It's interesting you brought that up, because one of the questions was, what exactly is the faith, the type of faith that's antithetical to the knowledge? Is it the same thing as what Christians claim to have? Let me see if I can ask it a different way. Are you both of the opinion that all faith is of such a nature that someone has something they want to believe and they will distort or misconstrue the evidence or ignore contradictory evidence in such a way that they maintain their belief? Or do you think there's other kinds of faith that engage in a process, bring in all the evidence, wrestle with it, and still arrive at a position of faith? Does that distinction make sense?
I'm not sure if I'm getting it, but I could take a shot if it's still my turn here.
Sure, either one of you.
I think that there is a way that religious people use faith that does go a bit beyond the way that I was addressing it in my talk. With regard to understanding what's true, I think that faith is antithetical. It's starting from the wrong end. It's a determination to believe something independent of a process of inquiry that should lead you to believe that it's true or not. However, I often notice that people use the term when they're talking more about sometimes a way that they feel of a comfort level they want to have, a sense of peace that's associated or that they associate with their set of beliefs. So sometimes when people say faith, I think they're sort of talking about a feeling of connection, not necessarily an unfounded belief.
Levi, any thoughts on faith?
It's a very quite a box. It's got lots of different. There's.
Are you suggesting it makes it hard to talk about it because everyone in this room thinks of faith in a particular way that makes the dialogue hard to have? Even just personally, throughout my whole journey, I've actually struggled with the idea of faith and understanding it. And I grew up in a Catholic family, went to St. Francis and graduated. Although I kind of stopped being Catholic when I was around sophomore year. But I, lots of my friends are Christian, and I've talked a lot about faith with them, and it's always been a little hard for my intellect mind to really wrap my mind around to get it, because it is something where I think you're getting in touch with something deeper. It's coming from some other source maybe. If you're sticking around for the discussion afterwards, it just struck me this would be a great question to discuss when we ask the question, what is faith? It would be interesting to hear what different people have to say of what they mean when they say, if you're a person of faith, I have faith, what does that mean? Levi, you say we can't know that God exists or doesn't. What do you mean by God? how would you define God that you're unsure of? Maybe that.
I guess that's probably a reference to the agnostic thing. Again, it's one of those terms that means something different to every person, and I also, this is something I very strongly believe, that if we have this idea of God as like this kind of infinite being, infinitely powerful, infinitely wise. Well, if that's the case, I don't think that my limited mind has any possibility of like understanding what God is, or so.
A couple questions on the same line. Do you guys believe that there are truths found beyond the scope of science on one hand, or also beyond the scope of, well, no, let's just leave it at that. From both of you, are there any kind of truths that are found beyond the scope of science, empiricism, the study of the world as it is? And Levi, you might have addressed this some already. But I'm not sure if you touched on that in your presentation, Scott.
I think it's a really reasonable question to ask, because I left that possibility open just a little bit when I talked about what this approach to truth applies to. And I said it has anything to do with physical reality. And I said that religion and ethical claims have significant overlap into the physical realm. I think we get into some fuzzy meanings of words, perhaps. Maybe in human endeavors, there's truths or truisms that exist that aren't amenable to scientific inquiry, but they're more subjective. I think I don't think those would be like the rock hard type truths.
This leads me to another question. Someone asked each of you to define truth. Because it sounds like you're suggesting there's objective truths, middle of the puzzle, flag planting things, but then there's subjective truths, which some people would not associate subjective with truth. They would call it something else. What do you mean when you use the word truth? How would you define that? You could both answer.
Well, I think that anytime, so truth, you could say a statement is true, but I think that that's always secondhand, because it's a reflection or a representation of truth. So I think the only thing that truth can really be is reality itself, just in raw form. And the only time we experience that is right now in the moment and through our senses. And
So truth is that which we experience and know through our senses?
Well, no, it's reality, but that's how we experience it.
Okay.
Well, I think that truth might have to be defined by context. Truth about what? I think that there's probably this whole enormous category that has everything to do with the physical world or physical universe. I think is discoverable in the sense that it is real. There's an objective reality out there, and we may never know it. It may be that it's incomprehensible to us. Our minds were molded by a biological process that made it adept at survival at a certain time and place in Earth, and understanding the way nature works is not intuitive. Some of the things that have to do with particle physics and quantum mechanics and multiverses and such, it gets mind stretching, not because there's anything weird about nature, but because we're not equipped to wrestle with it. But I think it's out there to know, even if, and it's truth, even if it's maybe beyond achievable for us.
I do not have my watch with me. What time is it? 8:25. Okay, a couple more questions. Scott, you mentioned that evolution has wired us to believe things, if I understood you correctly, that have a survival benefit more than a truth benefit. If that's the case, how do we arrive at a point of confidence that the things we're talking about and discussing and believing now have a truth component to them and not merely a survival component to them?
It's funny. This question I think came up in pub theology once. I think I called it a certain person sophomoric. Not in
Would
the
that
group.
certain person
An author.
be here?
No. That would be an author. I think that to take an idea, a principle, saying that evolution leads to minds that are imperfect at understanding truth because they were, there was a different function that they served. Expediency was more important than being an excellent truth-finding machine. Even though evolution produces minds that are imperfect at pursuing truth, doesn't mean that therefore anything the human mind comes up with is fallible. That's like saying, that trade argument you'd see in tracts that, well, the second law of thermodynamics says the disorder in the universe is always increasing, therefore, evolution increases order, therefore evolution didn't happen. That's what I mean, sophomoric. It's taking a principle and really almost willfully misapplying it. We find ourselves with the brains we have. It's instructive to recognize where they came from and why they work the way they do. It helps you understand why you think and feel the way you do. But there's a little piece of it that just by chance we can torture into serving a higher function for us and pursuing truth if we do it methodically and are careful to exclude the parts of our brain that will steer us astray.
Anything to weigh in on that, Levi?
I would agree that that is an awesome way to go about doing science. But again, when it comes back to things like just relationships and all that kind of stuff, there's a whole other dimension. But I know you're excluding that whole dimension.
Well, that's kind of the other category, the softer truths or truisms,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think those can be just as significant.
Like men never stop and ask for directions. Oh, that's the truth, isn't it? There's.
I don't know what you're talking about. All right, one last question. How do both of you interpret things in your life that spiritual people would describe as miraculous or supernatural?
I would look for more confirmation or try to test it.
Yeah, being very confident that nature behaves reliably. That I think that following those rules of nature, the constancy of nature, is almost a corollary of existence. What exists has to sort of fit as the solution fits an equation. Something that doesn't fit the equation, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5. It can't be. It can't exist. So, and I think there's an elegance to that. Although we got to be careful about defining our worldview on a sense of elegance. That's bringing a little bit of emotion into it. We got to stay dispassionate. But I lost my track.
That's all right. It was a sufficient answer. On that note, I think we'll wrap up our first night of etc. For one, let me just say again, these two brave souls on the first night of a brand new endeavor in Traverse City, they didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know what the questions would be. They didn't know what kind of audience there would be. We've managed to set a tone now, so if some of you would like to sit in the hot seat down the road here, you have an idea of what's coming. But thanks again, you two guys, for being brave enough to do this. Comments about ways to follow up from here. What we'll do on Etcetera's Facebook page, which, by the way, go there and like it, is now that I have questions in print, this is the other handy thing, I'm going to put these questions up on the Facebook page so you can weigh in, visit the page. I'll try to condense them, otherwise I'm going to have 15 questions up there. But there'll probably be a list of them. I encourage you, go there and answer them. Answer them boldly, answer them calmly, answer them in a way that you want other people to answer your questions. But it's a great way to do a follow-up in the discussion. As you saw, we're just scratching the surface with these things, hopefully as this group plays out for years. we'll continue to scratch deeper and deeper and get to the heart of things. So we invite you next door. It's going to take us just a couple minutes to put some stuff away. But if you join us, when you go in the front door, the blue tractor, turn left and go to the room way on the left. It's kind of off by itself. It's got some sofas and stuff in there. That's for us. And we can do a big, huge group discussion, or it can be groups of 3 or 4 or 5. It doesn't really matter, but it's an opportunity to get to know someone you maybe haven't met before and start discussing the topic. We've absorbed a lot of information tonight. It's your chance to weigh in with other people. Next month, it's the last Thursday of each month, so I think it's the 31st next month, actually, the very last day of May. The topic, once again, has to do with the whole question of economic justice, using the Occupy movement and the things they're standing for as a way to start asking questions about how do you address poverty, how do you address inequality of wealth in America. Brandon Everest from NMC will be doing a lot of the presentation. Some of you know him, but a couple other people in the community will be doing that as well. So I'm looking forward to it. One other thing, right here by the door, Scott's holding some posters, and Levi almost has his right foot on top of a different kind of poster. We would love for you to help us get the word out about this. If you want to take some with you and you're going to a coffee shop or there's a bulletin board somewhere where you can just post some information on, grab a couple of these on your way out. And that's less walking I have to do through downtown, asking everybody if I could put things in their window. But if you enjoyed the experience and would like to see more people be a part of it, feel free to pick some of that stuff up and get the word out.